Between LSU or Tulane, which of their games are the most must-win game? Also, a little reaction to LSU baseball's SEC schedule. Did they kick somebody's dog in the SEC offices? And also, can the Cajuns shock the world and beat Mizzou? We'll talk about that and more, all coming up on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome back to the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you listening in. And if you haven't already, go ahead and give this podcast a follow. That way you don't miss an episode. We drop one each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, to get you what you need to know, all in a nice package that's going to be just about a half hour in length. That way you can digest the information I'm giving you while you're also digesting your lunch. That's what we call it, the Louisiana Lunch Hour. Make sure you go check us out on social media as well. We'll give you all the latest breaking news from your favorite teams across the state of Louisiana. And today we're going to go more towards Baton Rouge and New Orleans with this big topic, because I thought about this a lot yesterday afternoon while I was making my way back home before taping the pod. It's about two of the bigger games on tap for the teams we talk about from the great state of Louisiana. And it raised an interesting question for me. Who needs to win their game more on Saturday night? LSU or Tulane? It's not a knock against other games like the Raging Cajuns taking on Mizzou, but these are massively important games that are very winnable, and two with very big storylines as we kind of progress into the second quarter of the 2025 season. In the case of LSU, it's a chance to jumpstart on SEC wins and establish that the Clemson win was not a fluke. Because especially after what we saw on Saturday and the offense kind of sleepwalking to a win over La Tech, you have to show that you can do this against the SEC. Because we talk about it a lot, and I feel like it's becoming more and more of a recurring theme over the last few years, is that the SEC is starting to cannibalize itself at a very quick rate. You've got not a murderer's row. You got two really tough games coming up in the next 3 weeks between South Carolina or Ole Miss. But you got to take this one game at a time if you're any team in the league. But if you are LSU opening up SEC play against a rival that you had the better part of the last 5 years beating and then come up short against them last year, despite putting up more plays than Florida last year, they ran 49 more plays. Credit to Josh Pate for bringing up this stat, and still lost the game by 11 points. That's not great. And I understand the Florida team that we've seen so far doesn't look as good as that team did last year that managed to beat you by 11 points. But I've got to believe that Billy Napier, despite the fact that he got a blessing from Scott Strickland after a disappointing loss, that, everything's fine, we're going to stick with him through the end of the season. Like, he's got to be still sweating bullets. And if I'm Billy Napier, I'm going to coach my ass off in this game. Because if this season starts really going further cattywampus, and trust me, it looks like it's not going to get any easier when you're playing programs like Miami and the rest of the SEC schedule you've got left. You've got a point to prove that the USF game was a blip on the radar and you can get right back on track. Again, if I'm Billy Napier, I'm coaching my butt off, because if this thing continues to go more towards the other side, I would not be surprised if there's some big donors that could make Strickland sing a very different tune, and those donors could be willing to pay that buyout that's well over $20 million. I'm not going to get much into the keys to victory in today's podcast, but I will say that I think a point of emphasis will be if the offensive line can hold up, and also if Braylon Moore will be at the center position and how they can hold up if he's not able to play on Saturday. Because I think we all know Trey'Dez Green is pretty much, I'd say, like 99.5% certain to not play on Saturday. So we're just wondering on that. Then you get to Tulane, who got a really nice Power 4 win over Northwestern, 2-0. That said, I think Duke is a little more important because you're back at home after a game where you were kind of up against the ropes early on against South Alabama. Now you're back in a Power 4 matchup and you need another quality win because you look at where they are in the polls. They were one of the highest, not the highest, in the ARV category. Season's still very young, and the level of difficulty is about to bump up next week in Oxford, but you've got to not look too far ahead and look past Duke. And I also think it's a massively important game for Jake Retzlaff and the rest of this team, because you're going up against your former quarterback, Darian Mensah. It's almost like the stars aligned for this to happen. You know, Mensah opted to leave the program after he led them to an AAC title game a year ago for an extremely lucrative NIL deal to be part of the Blue Devils. And John Summerall, justifiably so. I think he loves his loves all his players. And Mensah was a hell of a player for the Green Wave. And he understands why he decided to exit stage left. That's the way you are going to say that if you are a head coach, no matter what level you're at. You are going to understand the economy and the business that's being run right now in the NC2A. It's all about making sure that you can buy the best players. It's a lot like the NFL, but relatively speaking, there's no true salary cap in place. So you could pretty much say, hey, you want to come over to our program? You want to do what you did over at Tulane, but at a higher level and have a chance to play for a national championship and get more recognition and have an opportunity to, let's say, get to the top half of the NFL draft? Because they could say, look at what happened with some of the guys that played for Tulane. They haven't seen much higher than this point. You play for Duke, you play for the ACC, where you got a little more eyes on you, you got a little more NFL scouts on you. You could be making this much money because you are considered to be an elite quarterback because you're playing the ACC, not the AAC, or the American now. I keep forgetting they've renamed themselves to just the American. Anyways, I digress. This is a chance for Tulane to make a statement that you can buy all the best players, but that's not going to get you much further or much closer to the promised land. We're in the middle of the most turbulent time in college athletics. NIL is muddying the waters to the point of no return. The rich are getting richer, while the little brothers, meaning the group of 6 teams, are kind of being held down, or in some cases being picked up by their ankles and held upside down till all their milk money comes out. This is a game that would be a statement for the group of 6 that they aren't ready to walk away and go quietly into that good night anytime soon. That said, if you ask me which game is the most important, I think it's got to be the LSU game going away. You headed into the season with national championship aspirations, and this is not a knock against Tulane, but I think losing this contest is going to hurt those odds of making it to the college football playoff. Forget national championship. You've got to get to that big dance in the first place. It's going to cause those hopes to fade away, not completely, but it is a slippery slope as you're staring down Ole Miss and South Carolina in a few weeks' time. I'm not necessarily sure Tulane's path is as linear. They've got to handle business this week, and then you play Ole Miss next week. If they can pull off an upset of Ole Miss, all bets are off. They could be that team like a Boise State that gets into the playoff. But I don't necessarily see that happening right here, right now. Call me by the time we get to December, we could have that conversation. But LSU, almost solely because it is the SEC. And if you're able to get to, let's say, 10-2, 11-1, you're almost guaranteed a spot at the table for that college football playoff. But you still got to handle your business. So I think the Florida game out of all the games that are going on this weekend, that is the one that is going to be the most important. And the one I think a lot of people are going to be talking about when it comes to the 2025 season. Because you lose this game, you still have a chance to do everything you want to do and more. But the odds of you doing so, they drop. Because you've got to think that once you get into about 2 weeks' time, you play Ole Miss, who has been playing you tough for the last years with the lane train. And if we see that defense hold serve, LSU has every chance to win that game. But then you've got to play a unique cat like Lenora Sellers and the South Carolina Gamecocks, who look a lot better than they have in years. I think probably going back to when Jadeveon Clowney was like dominating that defense. It's been a while since we've seen this kind of South Carolina team be this cocky, pun intended. LSU needs to win this game, so it's highly important, and dare I say it is must win for this team. If this were about 2-3 years ago, it still would be, but I feel like LSU still has a lot to prove, almost solely because they need to make sure people know that the win against Clemson was not a fluke. You lose to Florida, I think the fluke status and the fraud status starts to pop up, especially after what we saw with Clemson, where Clemson kind of handled their business and still looked pretty mid. And you looked fairly mid in the win against La Tech. Meanwhile, we're going to talk about the defending national champions, because my God, the SEC front office dropped their slate for the upcoming baseball season, and they said, hey, you won the national championship? That's great. Here's the schedule you've got, and good luck, God bless. I'm wondering, whose dog did they kick inside the front office at the SEC in Alabama? You don't have Arkansas and Texas, who both have very cakewalk schedules. It's crazy to think about. But looking at just the SEC play, I'm not going to bother with the non-conference stuff, because some people would say the non-conference, those midweek games don't necessarily matter. To each their own. But obviously, you're going to make your hay with what you have in your SEC schedule, and that's going to help determine where you are in the grand scheme of the RPI world. But SEC play is going to start in mid-March, as it always does, on the road against Vanderbilt. You mean to tell me that we got to deal with the Vandy Whistler right out the gates? Seriously? Then you host Oklahoma and Kentucky to end the month of March? That's fine. I'm willing to kind of like just say, hey, is what it is. Oklahoma, if you're playing Oklahoma softball, it's a different story. But Kentucky's still a fairly decent program. You're going to be tough out in that 3-game series. But then you've got a barn burner of a month in April with Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. All of those teams on the road. All of those teams are consistently good to great teams. The hype is there for those programs. And you got to do that in a hostile territory, in Stark Vegas, in Oxford, and in Knoxville. That's not a great look if you are LSU. You are staring down the barrel of a rough SEC slate. And then you got Texas A&M at home, which, that is what it is. Then you have the regular season wrapping up at home against South Carolina. I almost said North Carolina. What am I talking about here? Then you go on the road at Georgia. Then you host Florida prior to the SEC tourney. The biggest takeaway I have is I don't see Arkansas. I don't see Texas. And Arkansas and Texas, relatively speaking, have a very, very favorable season when you look at what they have. I'll break that down right now just for giggles and grins, because it's wild to think that a program like Arkansas, that has had a lot of potential over the last few years to get things done, they start off their slate against Mississippi State, at South Carolina. They host Mississippi State, at South Carolina, host Florida, at Auburn, at Alabama, host Georgia, at Mizzou, host Ole Miss, host Oklahoma, at Kentucky to close out the season. You don't have LSU on that schedule, A&M, Texas, like they have an incredible cakewalk in comparison. I don't know whose dog they kicked or whose rug they peed on, but LSU baseball got absolutely hosed in this. In 2025, we are talking about an Arkansas team having a very easy road that could probably lead them to almost a guaranteed super host. And LSU is going to have to fight and claw to get a super host right after winning a national championship because of the schedule that you are up against. Wrapping up with some other LSU news. The Texas transfer Sadir Mitchell is leaving the program. It's a weird decision for him to leave this team 2 games into the season without even registering a snap. But it's clear he didn't fit the system that was in place, and it didn't necessarily work out when he first intended to transfer to the program. Mitchell struggled during fall camp, was passed up by several players, including true freshman Walter Mathis. Like, if you aren't able to get a spot on that team and you are getting passed up by freshmen, yeah, it's clear that this system is not for you. I'm hoping that he finds his spot, but it's clear that the system that is in place now is not the same system that was in place whenever he decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and leave the Longhorns and join this team instead. That's kind of the long and the short of it when it comes to Sadir Mitchell. Wish him all the best after the reports I saw this afternoon. Kind of a surprise, like just to see that pop up, because usually you would see this like towards the end of the season, but it hasn't even, the season's not even a month old. And you're announcing this? Kind of a weird play, to say the very least. But we'll wrap things up in a nice little bow, going towards the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. They have a massive game this weekend over in Como, because they're going to be taking on the Tigers of Mizzou. And my question has been posited over the last few days from people that I talked to on a regular, and they're like, hey, do you think the Cajuns can shock the world? Can they do what they did in 2020 against Iowa State? Can they do the thing and beat Mizzou? Short answer is no. I'll get to the long answer right now. And it's a lot like what I said before the season started. The Cajuns in 2020 would have whipped Mizzou if not for COVID wiping that game. Now, then it got replaced by the legendary Iowa State upset victory that started the greatest season in program history until the very next year in 21, when Billy Napier helped this team finally hoist the Sun Belt Conference Championship that they should have won in 2020 if not for, Coastal Carolina wimping out. But we'll leave that be, because that was 5 years ago. I think we've grown. I think we've grown as a fan base and a program to not talk about that anymore. But Mizzou, this isn't your slightly older brother's Mizzou. This team has handled business a lot over the last couple of years. They had a 10-win season last year. Haven't lost a game since November of last year. And this is a team that isn't at the same level as it was in 2020 or 2021. And it's not a knock against Coach Des. It's just the state of the union when it comes to the world of college football. I don't think you're going to see these monsters, these big uglies that we saw that the Cajuns had towards the end of the Billy Napier area, when NIL was really in its infancy and everybody was trying to figure it out and how to kind of get past certain things. I just feel like it's going to be a very difficult road if you're the Louisiana Raging Cajuns playing in this game. You have a lot of deficiencies that are going to get exposed out in Como. Thankfully, it's not a November game, but even then, I think that Mizzou crowd is going to be rocking in that stadium. Now, can the Cajuns cover? I firmly believe they could. Again, I said the same thing would happen with La Tech covering that massive spread. But I feel like winning that game is going to be something that is well out of reach. And again, I would love to see every single time the Cajuns play a big team, like a Florida, like in Kentucky, like a Mizzou, to see them get that win, because it is exceptionally rare to see a Cajuns team beat a Power 5 at the time, Power 4 nowadays team. And I think Mizzou could be susceptible to that. But at the same time, I feel like this is going to be a 42-14, 56-7 type game. And it's not because I don't think the Cajuns are capable of making it a competitive ball game. I just feel like Mizzou is a lot better, and the Cajuns are on a much lower tier. Simply because the quarterback play is uninspiring. You know, the run game is good, but then you've got Sterner. Sterner was nailing 50-yard field goals, but also at the same time was struggling making relative chip shots in Saturday's win over McNeese. There's levels to this stuff, and I feel like the Cajuns aren't on that level. They're more like the HUD teams when they played Oklahoma State in 2011 and 2012, where they had fun, but then, you know, Mike Gundy decided to go ahead and whip up on us. That's just kind of the long and the short of it. And that's about all I got for today's edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you listening in. And as always, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe today on Spotify. Also, check us out on YouTube. We got some exclusive content coming up over there, as well as on all of our social media platforms. X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of that. Go ahead and check us out. Just search Louisiana Lunch Hour. We promote it each and every day. And we'll catch you tomorrow as we get one day closer to another fantastic football weekend. Man, it feels good to say that, especially when it comes to pro football being back, college football being back in full swing. Boy, is enjoying this, and hopefully you're enjoying it as well. Talk to you mañana. You've been listening to the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast.